Welcome to the Midnight Codex, where forgotten truths breathe and shadows tell their tale. Tonight, don't blink and don't look behind you.
Rome, this ancient city where the pulse of history beats in every stone, every street corner, every breath of air. The Vatican stood at its heart, its towering spires piercing the sky like silent sentinels guarding the most precious of secrets. I'd always admired it from afar, fascinated by the mysteries it contained, the stories buried beneath its golden facade. But today, as I stood on the balcony of my apartment, staring at the distant silhouette of St. Peter's Basilica, I felt a different kind of pull, one that had nothing to do with admiration. I was alone now, stripped of everything I had once held dear. Once, I was a history professor, respected in my field, with a reputation built on my obsessive research into religious artifacts and conspiracies. But that was before the scandal. Before my obsession with the forbidden and the dangerous cost me my job, my career, my credibility. They called me reckless, unstable, a danger to the very fabric of academic truth. The world had closed its doors to me, and now I wandered through life as a man in exile, shunned and forgotten. But then, the letter came. I can still remember the moment it arrived. At noon, just as I was poring over a stack of old manuscripts in my dimly lit apartment, there was a knock on the door. I hadn't heard anyone approach, yet there it was. A thick, heavy envelope, sealed with crimson wax. There was no return address, only my name, written in elegant script. John Adams, historian, scholar of the sacred and the forbidden. My heart skipped a beat. Who would send me something like this, especially in the wake of my disgrace? I stared at the envelope for a long time, feeling its weight, feeling the undeniable pull it had on me. I didn't want to open it. I knew better. After all, the last time I'd been this curious, I had lost everything. But I couldn't resist. My hands trembled slightly as I broke the seal, the wax cracking with a satisfying finality. The letter inside was as strange as the envelope itself, thick, almost ancient, the kind of paper that felt like it had been preserved for centuries. The ink was dark, almost too dark, as if it had been stained with something more than just pigment. The message was simple, direct, but somehow it resonated deeper than it should have. John, I have followed your work for years. You are the only one who has ever come close to uncovering what the Church has hidden for centuries. The Vatican has many secrets, but there is one that is so dangerous, so dark, that it has been buried beneath layers of power, faith, and fear. I have found it. I have found the key to the gate that leads to hell itself. You are the only one who can understand it. Meet me at the Vatican tomorrow night. I will explain everything, but you must follow the rules. At first, I thought it was a joke, a prank maybe, a cruel trick played on a man already broken by his own failures. The key to hell? It sounded ridiculous, absurd, a product of my own desperate mind, grasping at any shred of meaning it could find. But there was something in the way the letter was written, something that made my blood run cold. I'd spent years reading about such things, ancient relics, forbidden texts, and the twisted secrets the Vatican had hidden for centuries. I'd always suspected that there was something deeper, something darker beneath the surface of their carefully curated history. But this was different. The letter spoke of a key, not a metaphor, not an allegory, but a physical object with the power to unlock something far beyond human comprehension. Hell itself. The thought lingered in my mind, swirling around like a dark cloud. Could it be true? Could such a key actually exist? I knew the legends, of course, stories passed down for centuries about the Vatican's hidden vaults, about the forbidden books and relics locked away from the world. There were whispers of a door that led to a place beyond the physical world, a door that could not be opened, a place where evil itself was confined. The Church had always denied such things, of course, dismissing them as myth, as heresy. But I had always believed there was more to the story. And now, Here was this letter, promising to reveal it all. But why me? Why had this Aurelia chosen me to find the key? What did she know that I didn't? I felt my heart race as I considered the possibilities. My mind, which had been dull and resigned for so long, suddenly sparked with life. I could almost feel the pull of the Vatican, the center of all things dark, all things forbidden. And I could feel the lure of the key, the temptation to find it, to hold it in my hands, to unlock the gate that no one else had dared approach. I knew I was risking everything, but I also knew that I had nothing left to lose. My career was gone, my reputation destroyed. I was a man on the edge, a man who had already been cast aside by the world, and so I made my decision. I had to go. I paced the room, the letter burning a hole in my pocket. Tomorrow night. The Vatican. I couldn't afford to hesitate. The letter had mentioned rules I had to follow if I wanted to understand the truth. But what were those rules? What could be so dangerous that it required specific instructions? I didn't know. And part of me didn't want to know. But part of me, a darker part, wanted to see it, to experience it, to know the truth, whatever the cost. I grabbed my coat from the back of the chair and slipped it on. The evening air outside felt colder now, more oppressive, as if the city itself were closing in on me. I stepped out onto the streets of Rome, the familiar streets now feeling unfamiliar and alien. The city seemed different, as though I had entered a world that no longer belonged to me. As I walked toward the Vatican, the towering silhouette of St. Peter's Basilica looming ahead, I felt the weight of my decision settling on my shoulders. I'd crossed a line, and I knew there was no going back. The invitation had been given. And now, I would walk into the heart of the Vatican, where the Church's most dangerous secret lay waiting. The darkness of Rome stretched before me, the quiet streets seeming to hum with an energy I couldn't explain. The air was thick with something unspoken, something ancient. I didn't know what I was about to face, but I knew this. Everything was about to change, and I couldn't turn back now. Tomorrow night. The Vatican. The key to hell. There was no turning back. I had to know. The first time I stepped into the Vatican, I couldn't shake a feeling of unease. It wasn't the usual thrill I felt when entering ancient sacred places, nor was it the intellectual excitement I had once experienced when studying forgotten manuscripts. No, this feeling was different. It was as though the very air was heavier, thick with secrets, and I could sense something watching me from the shadows, something I couldn't quite see but was very much aware of. The room I stood in was not what I had imagined when I first thought of the Vatican's archives. It wasn't filled with majestic shelves lined with priceless books or illuminated by soft golden light. Instead, the space was dark, oppressive, and filled with dust. The walls were crammed with forgotten manuscripts, ancient scrolls, and relics that hadn't been touched in centuries. The air felt dense, as though each document was saturated with the weight of time, and each relic carried a burden of knowledge meant to remain hidden. Aurelia stood before me, her presence almost otherworldly. She seemed to belong here, as if she had always existed among these relics and manuscripts, as if the archives themselves had shaped her. Her eyes locked onto mine, piercing and intense, as if she were assessing every thought running through my mind. "You've come," she said softly, her voice both soothing and unsettling. "I didn't know how long I'd have to wait for someone like you." I swallowed hard, unsure of how to respond. Her words felt like a silent invitation, but also a warning. How did she know me? How did she know what I had been searching for? But there was no time for questions. There was something much more pressing at hand. She stepped aside, revealing a small, weathered book in her hands, bound in dark leather. She handed it to me without a word. As soon as my fingers brushed the cover, I felt a strange weight, not just physical, but emotional, like I was holding something far more significant than just a book. I could sense it before I even opened it. Aurelia moved past me, her steps silent on the ancient stone floor. The light from the narrow windows barely illuminated her figure, but there was something almost ethereal about her, something that made me feel as though I was standing on the edge of an abyss I couldn't yet see. "You must understand," she said quietly, her tone shifting, becoming far more serious. "The key is not something you can simply take. It comes with dangers you can't even begin to imagine. If you want to uncover the truth, you must follow these rules, disregard them, and you will face consequences, irreversible ones." She reached into her pocket and pulled out a small, folded piece of parchment. My heart skipped a beat. As she handed it to me, I felt a chill run through me, as if the very paper itself was infused with something ancient, something dangerous. The list was short, but it was precise, and the weight of each word made my blood run cold. The rules: never touch the ancient scrolls without gloves. If you hear the bells tolling, leave the room immediately. Do not open the door marked 13 under any circumstance. If you come across a mirror, do not look into it for more than a few seconds. Trust no one, not even Aurelia. I stared at the list, my heart pounding. The first rule seemed almost simple: wear gloves when handling the ancient scrolls. But something about it, something in the way it was written, made my stomach twist. These weren't just practical instructions, they were warnings, and I knew they were meant to protect me from more than just dust and decay. The second rule: if you hear the bells tolling, leave the room immediately, made my pulse quicken. What bells? There were countless bells in the Vatican, but why were they so significant? What would happen if I didn't leave the room when they tolled? The more I thought about it, the more the question gnawed at me. There was something lurking in the very air, something that could only be triggered by these bells. But what? The third rule: do not open the door marked 13 under any circumstance, sent a shiver down my spine. The number 13 had always been associated with bad luck, but to banish someone from opening a door marked with it, there had to be something beyond that door, something that was far worse than simple superstition. The door seemed to call to me, its presence both ominous and inviting. I knew I should avoid it, but the temptation to find out what lay beyond it was almost overwhelming. The fourth rule was the most unsettling. If you come across a mirror, do not look into it for more than a few seconds. A mirror? What could be so dangerous about a mirror? I'd seen mirrors countless times, had stood in front of them for hours during my work, but this felt different. The idea of being warned against a mere reflection made my stomach twist. Was there something hidden within them, something that could reach out and claim me if I looked too long? The final rule, the one that hit hardest, was trust no one, not even Aurelia. This one shook me to the core. Aurelia, the woman who had brought me here, who had invited me into this world of forbidden knowledge, was telling me not to trust her? My mind reeled. How could I possibly continue if I couldn't trust the person who had led me here? And yet, a part of me already knew that her words weren't just idle warnings. There was something deeper, something hidden beneath her calm, cryptic exterior. I didn't know if she was guiding me toward salvation or leading me into a trap, but I had no choice but to follow. I looked up at Aurelia, but she wasn't looking at me. She was focused on something beyond me, something I couldn't see. I wanted to ask her more questions, wanted to demand answers, but I knew better than to question her. She wasn't going to give me anything more. She had already said everything she needed to. "I understand," I said, my voice barely above a whisper. I wasn't sure I did, but there was no turning back. Aurelia nodded slightly as if she knew what was going through my mind. "Then proceed, John. Follow the rules. Only then will you be able to survive what's to come." The silence that followed her words was suffocating. It wasn't just the silence of a room void of sound. It was the silence of something much darker. I felt like I was standing at the edge of an abyss, unsure if I would fall in or be pulled back to safety. I glanced at the parchment again, the list of rules seeming to burn into my skin. They were my only guide in this maze of unknowns, but I couldn't shake the feeling that they were also my chains. Chains meant to keep me from uncovering something even worse. But now, I had no choice. I had come too far. I had always imagined that when I finally set foot inside the deepest chambers of the Vatican, I would be in awe. But there was no awe here, only a creeping sense of dread, like an unseen force pressing in on me from all sides. Aurelia led me through narrow, dimly lit hallways that seemed to wind on forever, deeper and deeper beneath the Vatican. The air was thick with the scent of dust and age, the kind of smell you get when centuries of knowledge have been forgotten and left to decay in silence. The walls around me were covered in faded tapestries and worn stone, etched with symbols I couldn't recognize. As we walked, I couldn't shake the feeling that I was entering a place no one was ever meant to see, a place where the very foundation of the history had been buried long ago. She stopped in front of a massive stone door, unlike any I had ever seen before. The markings on the door were faint but unmistakable, symbols that mirrored the ones I had seen in the letter. There it was, the door that had haunted my thoughts since the moment I read the rules. I wasn't sure if I should feel triumph or terror, but the only thing I felt was a bone-deep cold that had nothing to do with the temperature of the room. Aurelia stepped back, her expression unreadable. "This is where you begin," she said softly. "But remember, the rules must be followed, John. If you break them, there's no going back." She turned and walked away without another word, leaving me standing alone in front of the door. The silence was overwhelming, a silence so profound that I could almost hear my own heartbeat pounding in my ears. It was as if the room itself was holding its breath, waiting for me to make the first move. I reached out, my fingers brushing against the stone, and immediately I felt a jolt of electricity course through my body. I recoiled instinctively, my pulse racing. There was something wrong with this door, something ancient and powerful that I couldn't quite comprehend. The whispers began then. At first I thought it was just the wind, but the more I listened, the more certain I became that it wasn't the wind at all. Faint voices echoed from the darkness, words I couldn't understand, but the tone was unmistakable. They were calling to me. The air grew thicker, heavier, as if the room itself was alive and aware of my presence. I shook my head, trying to dispel the growing sense of panic that threatened to overtake me. It wasn't real, I told myself. It couldn't be real. I was just tired, just imagining things. But deep down, I knew that something was happening, something that went beyond my understanding. I stepped back from the door, trying to steady my breath. The temperature had dropped dramatically in the last few minutes, and I could see my breath fogging in the cold air. The walls, once covered in faint symbols, now seemed to pulse, the markings shifting subtly in the dim light. The sense of being watched, of being studied by an unseen presence, intensified. I wasn't alone here, and I didn't think I ever had been. It was then that I heard the bells. At first they were a faint echo, like a distant warning, but then they grew louder, clearer, until the sound of the tolling bells seemed to reverberate through my entire body. The bells rang for what felt like an eternity, their deep resonant tolls vibrating through the stone beneath my feet. I remembered the rule. If you hear the bells tolling, leave the room immediately. I didn't hesitate. My body reacted before my mind could catch up. I turned, sprinting toward the door, my heart pounding in my chest, my breath coming in ragged gasps. The sound of the bells followed me, ringing in my ears, louder now, like a warning that I had crossed a line. But as I reached for the door, something happened. The door slammed shut with a deafening crash, the sound echoing through the chamber. I froze, my hand still inches from the handle. I pushed against the door, but it wouldn't budge. I could feel the weight of it, as if something behind it was holding it closed, trapping me inside. Panic surged through me. I pounded on the door, shouting for Aurelia, for anyone to help. But the only response was the sound of the bells, still tolling, their ominous ringing growing louder with each passing second. I was trapped. My mind raced. I'd followed the rule. I'd left the room immediately. Why was I still here? Why was I locked inside this chamber, alone with nothing? With the sound of the bells and the suffocating silence to accompany me, I backed away from the door, my pulse hammering in my ears. The temperature had dropped even further, and I could see my breath misting in front of me. The whispers began again, softer now, but just as insistent. They seemed to swirl around me, their words indistinct but their meaning clear. You shouldn't be here. I wasn't sure if the whispers were in my head or if they were coming from the walls themselves, but I could feel them closing in on me. The sense of being watched, of something dark and powerful lingering just out of sight, was suffocating. I was no longer sure where the room ended and the darkness began. I felt as though the very walls were closing in on me, as though I had stumbled into a place I should never have entered. There was only one way forward. I turned and looked down the narrow corridor that stretched out before me. The passage was dark, the stone walls smooth and featureless, but something about it beckoned me. It was the only way out, and despite every instinct telling me to turn back, I knew I had no choice. The rules had already begun to shape my fate. The door was locked, the bells had tolled, and I had no idea what waited for me in the catacombs. I started down the corridor, the faint whispers still echoing in my mind, the temperature still plummeting around me. Every step I took felt heavier than the last. My mind screamed at me to stop, to turn around, to flee, but my legs kept moving forward, as if they had a mind of their own, drawn deeper into the labyrinth of the Vatican's hidden heart. The sound of the bells still echoed through my mind. But now I heard something else, something worse. Footsteps. I wasn't alone. I stood frozen in front of the door. My fingers hovered over the cold iron handle, trembling slightly, as if the door itself was aware of my presence. The 13 carved into the surface seemed to pulse under my touch, as if it were alive, watching, waiting. The warning, "Do not open the door," marked 13, echoed in my mind, but the pull of it, the undeniable urge to know, was far stronger. I had already broken one rule tonight. What was one more? The weight of the decision settled over me like a thick fog. I had come this far, my heart racing with a mixture of excitement and terror, but something deep inside was telling me that this was the moment I could never come back from. I wasn't just opening a door, I was stepping into the unknown, into a place that might tear apart everything I had ever believed in. I took a deep breath, feeling the air around me grow thicker, as though the atmosphere itself was closing in. The room felt colder now, the stone under my feet colder still. The dampness in the air seemed to cling to my skin like an invisible weight, dragging me down. But there was no turning back. I had already crossed the threshold. I reached out and grasped the handle. The moment my fingers touched the cold metal, I felt an electric jolt shoot up my arm. It was as if the door itself was alive, as if it were pulling me in, urging me to open it. The intricate carvings on the door seemed to writhe, shifting and twisting as I made contact. The symbols danced before my eyes, and for a fleeting moment, I thought I saw the faces of hellish creatures etched into the stone, their eyes glaring at me with a hunger that made my blood run cold. With a force I couldn't explain, I turned the handle and the door creaked open, revealing a hidden chamber beyond. I stepped inside, the sound of the door closing behind me reverberating like the last echo of a dying world. The air was thick with the scent of earth and stone, and the room stretched out before me, vast and endless. The walls were lined with intricate carvings, hellish figures twisting and contorting into grotesque shapes, demons, monsters, creatures from a nightmare long forgotten. The images seemed to come alive, their eyes following my every movement. I could feel the weight of the room pressing down on me, the history of it suffocating, as if the chamber itself were aware of my intrusion. But it wasn't the walls that drew my attention. It was the gate. A massive iron gate stood at the center of the room, towering and imposing. The gate was intricately designed, the iron twisted into an almost organic form, with symbols and markings I couldn't decipher. The markings matched the ones on the door, pulsating with a dark, almost malignant energy. It was unlike anything I had ever seen, and as I approached it, I felt a pull, an undeniable force drawing me closer, urging me to touch it, to open it. And then, on a pedestal at the base of the gate, I saw it. The key. It was small, almost insignificant in appearance, nothing like I had imagined, just a simple, weathered iron key, resting on the pedestal as though it had been waiting for me all along. The moment I laid eyes on it, I knew. This was the key to hell, the one that had been hidden for centuries. Its location had been known only to a select few within the Vatican. And now, it was here, before me, just waiting for someone foolish enough to claim it. I reached out, my fingers trembling as I touched the key. The moment my skin made contact with the cold metal, the world around me seemed to shift. The air grew heavier, the temperature plummeting, and the walls of the chamber seemed to ripple like water disturbed by a stone. A low hum filled the room, vibrating through the floor and into my bones. It felt as though the key itself was alive, and it was calling to me, urging me to unlock the gate, to release whatever was trapped beyond it. A voice whispered in my ear. "John." It was soft, barely audible, but it sent a chill racing through my spine. I pulled my hand back, but it was as if the key was pulling me in, tethering me to it. I couldn't move. My heart was pounding in my chest, and I could feel my breath quickening, the air growing cold around me. The voice whispered again, this time louder, more insistent. "John, you know what you must do." I tried to shake my head, but the words seemed to echo in my mind, wrapping around me like a vice. I could feel the ground beneath me shifting, warping, as if reality itself was beginning to unravel. The chamber, the gate, the key. It was all too much. I'd crossed into a world beyond my understanding, and now there was no way back. I looked at the gate again, my pulse racing, as I took in the intricate carvings that covered its surface. The symbols were shifting, twisting, and the whispers grew louder. It was as though the gate itself was alive, breathing, waiting for me to unlock it. I could feel the power emanating from it, and I knew, deep down, I knew that unlocking it would change everything. But what would I be unleashing? The thought sent a wave of nausea through me. This wasn't just some relic, some forgotten artifact from the past. This was the key to hell itself. It was a power so ancient, so dark, that I couldn't even begin to comprehend it. I reached out again, my fingers hovering over the key. But before I could make contact, a sudden, overwhelming sense of dread washed over me. I was no longer sure what I was supposed to do. Was I meant to open the gate? Or was I simply a pawn in a game I didn't understand, a game that had been set into motion long before I even walked into this chamber? I could feel the weight of the decision pressing down on me, suffocating me. The air was thick with it, as though the entire room was holding its breath, waiting for me to make the choice. And then I heard it again. "John." The voice was closer now, almost as though it was standing right behind me. I whipped around, but there was nothing there, just the shadows and the shifting walls of the chamber. What was I doing here? What had I stumbled upon? I reached for the key again, my hand shaking, but I didn't touch it. I couldn't. Not yet. I had one choice, and the consequences, whatever they were, would follow me for the rest of my life. The deeper I ventured into the catacombs, the more suffocating the atmosphere became. The air was damp, oppressive, and carried the weight of centuries of secrets, each breath I took feeling heavier than the last. The silence around me wasn't peaceful. It was unbearable. It seemed to settle into my bones, urging me to move faster, but my legs felt like lead, as though the very ground I walked on was dragging me deeper into the earth. The walls were close now. The cold stone pressed in on all sides, the narrow passages twisting and turning like veins in some ancient forgotten body. Every step seemed to echo louder, as if the catacombs were alive, breathing with me, responding to my presence. I couldn't shake the feeling that the deeper I went, the more the place seemed to close in around me, as if the very structure of the catacombs was aware of me, aware of the key in my hand. I wasn't alone. That thought had lodged itself deep in my mind, gnawing at me. I'd been alone when I first entered the Vatican, but now, as the key burned colder in my palm, I couldn't shake the sensation that something, someone, was watching me. The key. I clenched it tighter, the cold metal biting into my skin. It wasn't just a relic anymore. It was a part of me. From the moment I touched it, I felt as though it had taken root inside me, its power seeping into my very being. I could feel it, The curse that had followed me, that had consumed the priests who had tried to open the gate before me. I could feel their madness, their despair, their ultimate failure. I tried to push those thoughts away, but they clung to me, like the shadows that followed me through the labyrinth of stone. I could hear them now, the voices. They started as whispers, faint and distant, barely audible over the pounding of my heart, but soon the whispers grew louder, clearer, until they filled the catacombs around me. John. It was my name, but it wasn't my voice. It wasn't even human. It was something else, something older, darker. The voice slithered through my thoughts, curling around my mind, twisting it with every syllable. I spun around, my pulse quickening. But there was no one there, no one but the endless stone walls, the unbroken silence. The whispers continued, growing louder, more insistent. John, you must open it. I didn't want to listen, but I couldn't stop myself. The words resonated in my mind like a drumbeat, steady and demanding. I could feel the compulsion, the pull, and I knew, deep down, that I wasn't just hearing voices. They were calling to me, urging me to open the gate, to release whatever lay behind it, whatever had been locked away for centuries. I staggered forward, my fingers tightening around the key. It was almost too much to bear, the weight of it, the weight of what it meant, pressed down on me like an anvil on my chest. Every step I took felt like I was moving closer to something unspeakable. The temperature dropped. I could feel the cold seeping into my bones, chilling me to the core. The walls around me seemed to close in, pressing tighter with each breath. I could hear the soft scraping sounds now, footsteps, but not mine. These were slower, deliberate, and they echoed down the narrow corridors, getting closer, drawing nearer. I turned around, frantic, my heart hammering in my chest. There was no one there. The footsteps stopped, but the presence remained. It was as if the catacombs themselves were alive, watching me, waiting for me to make the next move. I wanted to run. I wanted to turn back, but I couldn't. I was already too deep. And then I saw it. The gate. It stood in front of me, looming, its massive iron frame twisted into strange, incomprehensible shapes. The carvings on its surface were grotesque, depicting creatures that twisted and writhed in ways no human mind should conceive. But it wasn't just the gate that drew my attention, it was what was behind it. The air around me seemed to hum with an energy I couldn't explain, a pulse that matched the pounding in my chest. The whispers had grown silent, but the presence was still there, watching me. I knew I had to open the gate. I knew it, deep inside. The key wasn't just a symbol. It was a trigger to unlock something that had been locked away for centuries, a door that could never be opened without a price. And the price? I already knew what it was. Madness, death, the end of everything I knew. But there was no turning back now. I had already come too far. I had already broken the rules. I had already let the key take root inside me. I reached forward, my hand trembling as I touched the gate. The metal was cold, like ice, but there was something else to it, a feeling of power, ancient and raw. I could feel it thrumming beneath my fingertips, as if the gate itself were alive, responding to my touch. The whispers began again, soft at first, but building in intensity. "Open it, John. Let it out. Let us out." My mind screamed at me to stop, but my body, my hand, moved of its own accord. The key in my palm burned hotter, its coldness slowly becoming unbearable. I couldn't pull my hand back. The gate, the key, it had chosen me. The curse was mine. Suddenly I was no longer in the catacombs. I was somewhere else, somewhere dark. The air was thick, suffocating, and I could barely breathe. I was surrounded by shadows, by shapes that slithered and moved just beyond my vision. I could feel them, the souls, the ones who had come before me, the priests who had opened the gate and were consumed by it. Their madness was a part of me now. I could feel their terror, their despair. They had opened the gate, and they had failed. I knew what had happened to them. I knew what would happen to me. The whispers in my mind grew louder, a chorus of voices that filled the void around me. They were urging me to open the gate, to release what had been locked away, and I could feel it now, the pressure, the weight of eternity bearing down on me. But I wasn't sure anymore. Was I supposed to open it? Was this truly my choice? Or had I already been chosen? The key, the curse. It was no longer just an object in my hand. It had become part of me, part of the very fabric of my being. I couldn't escape it. I couldn't escape them. The gate was before me, its iron frame twisted, deformed. The symbols pulsed, growing brighter, and I could feel the darkness behind it, hungry, waiting. My body trembled, but I couldn't stop. The whispers had become a roar in my mind, urging me forward, demanding I release what lay beyond. I had no choice. I pressed the key into the lock. The chamber was still, except for the faint hum that seemed to vibrate through the air. The massive stone door in front of me loomed like a sentient entity, waiting for me to decide its fate. My fingers curled around the key, cold and trembling. I had come so far, too far perhaps, and now, standing at the threshold, I had to make a decision that would forever alter the course of my life. The symbols etched into the door pulsed with a strange, otherworldly energy, their shifting patterns reflecting a power that was as ancient as time itself. The more I stared at them, the more they seemed to move, almost alive, as if the door itself were waiting for the key to complete its purpose. The air around me crackled with tension, each breath I took feeling heavier than the last. The chamber felt smaller now, the walls closing in, not from space but from the weight of what was about to happen. The key fit perfectly into the lock, and I could feel the vibrations from it, as though the gate itself recognized the key's presence, as though it needed the key. I had touched it before, felt its power thrumming through me, but this moment felt different. This was the moment where everything would either end or begin, where I would cross the line that had been drawn so many centuries ago. I could feel the presence. It had been with me all along, whispering in the shadows, urging me forward. But it wasn't just the presence of something outside. It was inside me, in my bones, in my blood, in the very marrow of my being. The key had chosen me, not because I was special, but because I was weak. It had sunk its teeth into my soul, slowly and imperceptibly, until I was no longer sure where the key ended, and I began. I stood there, trembling, every muscle in my body screaming at me to walk away, to leave this place and never return. The line between the real world and this infernal realm had blurred to the point where I could no longer tell which side I was standing on. The whispers that had followed me since I first touched the key were now a cacophony of voices. "John, open it." The words were soft, but they were not from my mind. Number, this wasn't my voice. This wasn't even the voice of the gate. These were the voices of the damned, of the souls who had failed before me, who had touched this cursed key and unlocked the door, unleashing horrors they could never undo. The chamber was no longer just a room beneath the Vatican. It was a space between worlds. I could feel the air thickening with the promise of chaos and retribution. I could see the shadows stretch longer, twisting into forms that weren't quite human, reaching out to me, begging me to make the final choice. They were just beyond my reach, but their presence was undeniable. They weren't waiting for me to open the gate. No, they were waiting for me to release them. I glanced back at the gate. The iron was cool to the touch, but beneath it, I could feel the pulse, alive, restless. It was ready to be unleashed. The key was the last step in a ritual older than humanity itself, a ritual that could reshape everything. It could open the gates to hell, or perhaps worse, to something beyond it. But there was a part of me, deep down, that resisted. A small, feeble part of me that remembered why I had come to this place in the first place, to uncover the truth, to expose the lies, to find the answers hidden by the church. I had believed that unlocking this gate would reveal the ultimate secret. But now, with the weight of the decision pressing down on me, I realized that truth came with a cost I might not be willing to pay. The whispers grew louder, their urgency now unmistakable. I could almost hear them pleading, begging me to open the gate, to free them from their prison. "John, let us out." I wanted to run, I wanted to leave, but I couldn't. I'd already gone too far. The walls around me felt like they were closing in. No longer just physical space, but the weight of the curse that had been placed on me. The key, the gate, the voices, it was all tied together. There was no escaping the consequences of what I had already started. The only question left was whether I would finish it. A voice broke through the cacophony, one that was clearer than the rest. It was not the voice of a demon, nor the voice of the damned. It was Aurelia's voice. "John," I turned. She was standing in the shadows, just outside the glow of the lantern. I hadn't even noticed her arrive, but there she was, as calm as ever, her eyes fixed on me, unreadable. I couldn't speak. The words caught in my throat. How had she gotten here? Why was she here now? Her expression gave nothing away. "You've come this far," she said softly, stepping into the light, her gaze never leaving mine. "You know what you have to do." The question hung between us. The decision. Would I open the gate? Would I free the entity trapped behind it? Could I face what I had already uncovered, knowing there was no turning back? I felt her eyes on me, watching my every move, her silence like a weight pressing down on me. I was trapped in this moment, trapped between the past, the present, and the curse I had unleashed. Suddenly, the door behind me slammed shut with a force that shook the chamber, rattling the stones beneath my feet. My heart leaped into my throat. I spun around, panic rising in my chest, but the door was now locked. I had been sealed in. The weight of it hit me all at once. I was trapped in this space, in this moment. The decision was made for me. I couldn't leave. There was no escape. The line had already been crossed. The gate before me pulsed with power, its iron surface vibrating in the stillness. The key fit perfectly into the lock, but I was no longer sure if I could unlock it, if I could bear what would come. Yet as I stood there, my heart hammering, I realized something else. The gate wasn't waiting for me to unlock it. It was waiting for me to accept it, accept the curse, accept what it would do to me, to the world. The price would be high, but I had already paid it. I reached forward, fingers trembling. The key was alive in my hand, pulling me toward the lock, and as my hand hovered over it, the whispers crescendoed into a roar. The shadows around me reached out like a tide, pulling me, urging me forward. The door to hell was just a turn of the key away. And then, everything went black. Just as I was about to make the final turn of the key, everything stopped. The door behind me slammed shut, trapping me in the dark, unblinking silence of the chamber. The gate before me was still, waiting. But I had crossed the line. I wasn't just a visitor anymore. Was it already too late to turn back?